do I remember how to do all of this? Am I pressing the right buttons? It's funny how
Yeah.
1 week off can really throw you off balance, the whole thing. But they before they would not give us the whole week off. They only started giving us the whole week off in the last couple of years, because I think most professors were canceling class anyway. They would make us come to class Monday through Wednesday. And most people were either not showing up to class or canceling class. And so they decided to just give us the whole week off and add the days and other places in the calendar. So don't worry, we're still getting the same amount of teaching days in. But part of me wonders how I'm like, I like having the whole week off, but it's one of those things where you're like, now you want the whole break. It's not enough of a break. And it makes getting into these last 2 weeks of the semester harder. So that's the main thing. Remember that we still have a few weeks left of the semester. The goal at this point is to make it through the last few weeks. Right. And most of you are in good shape, at least in this class. So let's talk about some of that. So the first thing is the Global Lyceum assignments. So some of these Global Lyceum well, not some, the Dobbs Global Lyceum assignment is super glitchy. Like at times on my end, it seems to be working, and at times it's not. It like on my end, see if I go to, and I moved it, by the way, I moved it from week 13. It's not there anymore. So it's now in week 15. So when I click on it on my end now, it does, like, I can type stuff into the answer, but I don't think everybody can. So I'm going to propose me deleting that assignment, but don't get too excited. Instead, asking you a question on Canvas about Roe v. Wade, except for Robert. Robert already submitted. He emailed me the answer to the Global Lyceum activity. So Robert, you don't have to do anything. I've gone in and put in the points in. You're done with that one. So if anybody also had answered that question on Global Lyceum and wants to email me their answer, email it to me and I'll give you the points. You don't have to do the Canvas activity. Medea, okay, you have been trying to do it. Okay, that's good, Medea, to know. Thank you for letting me know, because now I know that, okay, people were trying. So what I will do is give you the option. If Medea, if you have your answer typed up, email it to me and I will give you the points for it. Or anybody else that already had, like if you typed up your answer and you were just waiting for the system to work, email me your answer so I can give you the points. But for everybody else, forget Global Lyceum for that activity. And instead, I just went into Canvas and added a question there for that activity instead of doing that question. So if you go to week 15, on here, it'll say you still have to do one activity on Global Lyceum, the 9/11 activity, but it's called week 13, History and Abortion in the Dobbs Decision. If you click on it now, you have one question and it's about lecture. Right, so we'll talk about the answer to that question today, but this makes it a little bit easier. That way you don't have to deal with the Global Lyceum glitches, and it's just that activity. So I wonder if like somebody just, like, maybe because it's an abortion question, somebody made it glitchy. And otherwise, like, we haven't had any other of those kinds of glitches on Global Lyceum. So I'll go in and delete it. I'll go in and delete it from the system. You still have to do the 9/11 and immigration question. And this one, it gives you information to look at. The sources are graphs. I'm talking about populations and immigration groups in the United States. And then it's another one of these graphs, right, where you have to answer or input information from the sources in there, right? So the question is, has the event of 9/11, when you look at the graphs, did 9/11 contribute to growing negative public feeling against foreigners or immigrants in the US, and has it had a lasting impact? You'll be able to see that in the sources, right? Because you'll be able to tell, okay, 9/11 happened in 2001, and then you'll see how the percentage in terms of this first graph shows percentage of Americans naming immigration as the most important problem. So you'll see how before 9/11, the people naming immigration as the main problem in the US was going down, had been going down. And then it spikes up, goes up and down. And then again, more up and down. So it's your analysis of these graphs. Do you think, what's the impact of 9/11? See, things do change in these graphs around the date of 9/11. And then how have those changes continued after that? So it's about analyzing these graphs and then putting in your answer to these questions here. Right. The second question is, does public rhetoric, especially in election cycles, seem to create spikes in both anti-foreigner and anti-immigrant feeling? Some of us, you could probably answer these questions just off your own experience of watching the news cycles and watching the rhetoric around elections. But does what we think match with what the numbers show? Right. So this is about, okay, we all have feeling or an instinct about these answers, but do the graphs, the numbers, do they match up with what we think? Right. So we'll be talking about this. We'll get to this week. Right. Are there any questions so far, though? I'll send an email out clarifying that the history of the Dobbs decision activity is deleted. You only have the 9/11 and immigration question, and then on Canvas you have the abortion question. A little bit back and forth, but that's why I'll email everybody to make sure that we keep that clear. Right. The other thing here is, because we only have a couple of weeks left of class, I want to make sure that everybody is clear on what we are doing and not doing. So we'll have material this week, but next week we won't have a lot of new material. The focus is going to be on writing the final paper, in large part because the day that we had been scheduled, like if we were doing a final exam instead of a paper, our final exam would be on Monday. That's why your final paper is due Monday, December 12th. Right, it's due Monday, December 12th, because that's the day we would have been scheduled. Instead of an exam, you have the paper due. Right, because it's due on the Monday of finals week, though, I think week 16, next week, should be entirely focused on getting that paper written, because you're not going to have a lot of time to finish it after that. Right, it has to get written. So I'll spend time even today talking about that final paper, but week 16 next week will be completely dedicated to just talking about that final paper. You have a paper due. Yep, it's been there. It's been on the calendar for some time now. So you can see on here, they're not going to be PowerPoints, no Global ICM activities, no Canvas activities. It's just, let's talk about the paper for that. So we'll still meet in there, but it'll just be about the paper. So, okay, the big question then for final exams week, I want to, because I have some first year freshmen in here, the thing that to know, oops, why am I clicking on things there? The thing to know about final exams week is that week you don't meet with you on your regular schedule, right? So we would not meet at all during final exams week. Right? You meet with the classes where you have to show up and take a final exam. Right? And the day of your final exam and the time is not your regular class time. You have an assigned time for the final exam. So you want to double check those with every single one of your classes, right? So for this class, we don't have a final exam. Instead, it's a final paper. So that means we don't meet at all that week. You don't see me. And most of your professors, actually, you might not see if you're just submitting stuff online. I like to have office hours that final week in case there are any lingering issues. So I've put them in here. My office hours only that week of final exams, are going to be on Wednesday, noon to 1 p.m. and then Thursday, 4 to 5 p.m. Those are the last time you will be able to come find me on Zoom will be those times. After that, I'm off the clock. I'm no longer available via Zoom. So if there are any issues with grades, with Global Lyceum, with anything, we want to start getting those cleared up, which means you have to go check your grades on Canvas. Some of you don't like to be doing that as you go, but now you want to do it if you haven't, so that to make sure that everything looks correct. You don't want to wait till the last minute to try to clear those issues up. I will still be available over email that week, so you can still reach me that way. But remember, that week I'm focused on getting everybody's papers graded. So ideally, we want to get those issues beforehand. So okay, what do you have to do for that final paper that you're going to have to submit for me? Oh, Maria, actually, yes, that's an excellent question. You can still submit late work, but my deadline for all late work, December 4th. December 4th. I have to have that deadline because you're all submitting papers on December 12th. I need to focus on grading those, and I won't have time to grade late work during final exams week. I need that week to grade your papers. So all late work is basically going to be, the deadline for all late work is December 4th for that reason, right? So you can submit any Global Lyceum activity, any Canvas activity that you've missed, that's your deadline. After that, it's all the focus is on final papers. And all the activities on Global Lyceum should be open. If anybody spots any closed activities, let me know, but I've made them open up until December 4th now. The only one that I did not open up was the one on mass incarceration, because that was an extra credit activity. And so if you missed it, you missed it. It was extra credit, so it's not a mandatory one. All the ones that were assigned and were mandatory are open. Okay, final paper. I started going over this before the break, but it's a 2 to 3 page paper. Right? Now, that might sound easy, and hopefully it is easy for most people. If you're used to writing longer papers, it might be. The trick, though, is that this is a source analysis. You're going to be analyzing 2 different sources and then coming up with your own argument based on those sources and what you've learned in class so far. Right? So the 2 sources are the 1619 project and the 1776 commission reports. They're basically competing visions of how American history should be taught in schools. Right? One is the 1619 project was out of the New York Times, which was the work of a reporter who brought together historians as well as poets, writers, musicians to put together a history of the United States that focused on slavery. Right, so it goes through some key elements of American history, with the focus being on slavery and then the legacy of slavery. Well, for a lot of conservative politicians, they felt that the 1619 project was too, that it was a critique of American society, that it did not tell the good parts of American history enough. And as a result, they put together a commission and then wrote up a report in which they were clearly kind of providing a counter argument to the 1619 projects. So your job's to look at how these 2 documents treat one topic. You don't need to analyze every page on each document. You want to focus on how they handle a topic. I've given some in here some ideas of what topics you can use. If you really have no clue what to do, I'm going to suggest the civil rights movement. Look at how each document handles the civil rights movement, because we spend quite a bit of time in it, and because both documents have sections on the civil rights movement. And your job then is to look at each document and say, okay, which one handles or teaches the civil rights movement better? Again, the tricky part about this is that it's a history paper. Right? It's a history paper. It's not a social science paper. It's not a psychology paper. It's not a criminal justice paper. It's not an engineering paper. So what do you need to do, or what is the format of this paper for me, for this class? Well, the main thing is that you have to use you have to cite the 1619 project, and you have to cite the 1776 report, and you have to have an argument. You have to have an argument. So I want to give you some examples of how you do that, right? So initially, right, you're going to have to decide how each document handles the civil rights movement. That's my example. But I want to give you an example of a bad thesis, something you should not have in your paper. Again, not have, right? So this is a bad example. The 1619 project and the 1776 report both present the history of the civil rights movement. Why am I saying that that's a bad thesis?
Because it doesn't analyze either of the reports.
Yes, this is a statement of fact. It's telling me both the 1619 project and the 1776 report talk about the civil rights movement. Great. I already know that. That's why I'm assigning this thing to you, right? Yeah. Tasha, did you have I see your hand up?
Yes, it says we can't use examples, but I already have a similar to the second one.
Then that works. I just don't want anybody copying and pasting my
No,
comments.
it's not the same. They have the same type of idea of saying that they left out things.
Perfect. Then that's why I use these examples of better examples, because you can copy the format, just not the words.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, no, you're good. So a better way of forming a thesis around this topic is something like this, right? The 1619 project takes a broader approach to the history of the civil rights movement than the 1776 report, that should be singular, not plural, which ignores important elements like the Black Panthers, Malcolm X, and the backlash to Martin Luther King Jr. Why is this? Why am I saying that this is a better thesis statement than the first sentence?
It explains what your thoughts are.
Yeah, this one actually makes an argument. It's saying, hey, the 1619 project is better than the 1776 report, right? And beyond that, it gives specific examples of why the 1619 project is better than the 1776 report. It says because it talks about the Black Panthers, because it talks about Malcolm X, and because it talks about Martin Luther King Jr. and why he was disliked, right? So in this paper, if this were the thesis I were reading in someone's paper, I would expect that one of the body paragraphs in the paper would be discussing the Black Panthers. One paragraph would be discussing Malcolm X, and then the third would be discussing Martin Luther King Jr., right? And what the paper would probably do is discuss the fact that the 1619 project talks about the Black Panthers, the fact that the report, the 1776 report, does not, right? And criticizing the report for leaving out an important topic, right? So it would then have to explain why it's bad that the 1776 report does not talk about the Black Panthers, for example. And that you can take that, by the way, if you already noticed that, you can use that because the 1776 report does not talk about the Black Panthers, right? So if you think the Black Panthers are an important part of the civil rights movement, you can criticize the report for that. Yeah, Tasha?
So do we have other sites? Can we cite other sources?
You can.
Okay.
You absolutely can. I'll get more to that in a second. On the other hand, you can decide that one document is better than the other, or you can decide that both documents are flawed. You can decide, hey, actually, I don't like how either document handles the civil rights movement. That is fair, right? Because it's your take on these documents. So here's an example of how you will write a thesis that makes that point, right? You'd say both the 1619 project and the 1776 report leave out key elements of the civil rights movement, like, and then you would name the things you notice both documents leave out, right? Whoop. Where, like, things are getting pressed. So here, by the way, I just put in a few things. Like I did notice that both reports don't spend a significant amount of time, like on the women of the civil rights movement, right? I spent some time in class talking about a little bit on that. So you can do that as well. Or you can decide your own topics, right? What are some of the things that both documents leave out or don't spend enough time on? Right? Those are fair critiques of both, right? And actually, it's more of an interesting argument if you can criticize both documents, right? I do say you cannot use these examples only because I don't want anybody copying and pasting these examples. I had students do that in the past, and I catch it very quickly because I wrote both of these sentences, and they're not really that great. I actually think that you all can write better thesis statements than these two. But if you're struggling, use the format, right? Use these sentences to formulate your own. Right? So that thesis statement has to be in your introduction. It has to be in your introduction. In a paper that's this short, it's 2 pages. You don't want me trying to read all over the place, trying to find what your argument is. You want to put it right at the beginning in the introduction. I've noticed that a lot of you like to write, and let me exit, and in a way that, and it's not wrong. It's not wrong, for example, in a paper to say, in this paper, or this paper will argue or will examine the 1619 project and the 1776 report. Something like that is not wrong to put in. In this paper, though, it will not work as a thesis. It will not work. Why? Because it's a short history paper. In a short history paper, this kind of writing is just delaying making the argument. And you don't want to delay making the argument. You want to just say it. There's no time to do a ton of setup. You have the introduction to set up, and that's it. Your body paragraphs should all be analysis of the documents, critique of the documents. Right, so you don't have the space to say something like this. In some of the social sciences, this kind of wording is required. That's why I'm spending time here saying, don't do that here. Like literally delete that sentence and instead go straight to what the actual argument is. Right? It is just more straight to the point, direct. For those of you who are history majors, this might sound redundant because we practice doing this a lot. For those of you that are not, it takes a little bit to kind of practice this stuff. So what I always offer is that if you want to send me your thesis, just your thesis statement, send it to me. And I can tell you, yes, it's perfect, keep going, or I can help you rewrite it. Right? Don't be shy about sending me drafts of your writing. I firmly believe that the best way to get better at writing is to have other people give you feedback. It just is. I don't like it either. I don't like other people reading my writing, but it is the best way to get better. Especially for those of you that haven't written a paper like this for a history class ever, or maybe in some time, I highly recommend you send me a draft or show it to me, right? I've also put together kind of what a possible outline would be. Now, like Tasha, I hear you've already started on it, right? And I have heard from several of you that have already started writing the paper. If you're good with, the structure of a paper like this, you don't have to look at this. Don't let me confuse you. This is for anybody who hasn't written a paper like this in history and needs a little bit more guidance, right? Like this is basically what your paper the elements your paper needs. Your paper is going to need an introduction and a conclusion, and probably somewhere around 3 paragraphs. That's not an exact number. Some papers might only have 2, some papers might have 4. That totally depends on what you're saying in your paper. I don't care how many paragraphs your paper has, as long as it's a well-organized paper, right? But here I give an example of what a body paragraph needs to have, right? One, it needs to have a topic sentence. Like, what's the point you're making in the paragraph? Right? Then it needs to have evidence from at least one of the documents. You can do that via either paraphrasing or using a direct quote. And then it needs your analysis. That's the key in every body paragraph. Your paper cannot be a summary of the 1776 report and the 1619 project. No summaries. You can use the quotes from both documents. You can summarize what the documents say and don't say. But I want to hear what you think. I already know what the report and the project say. I want to hear what your take on that, what they say is. Right? I want to hear your voice. And that's why this kind of structure to body paragraphs can be helpful. Like when you are looking back at your paper, editing it, does your paper make a point? Or does the paragraph make a point? Does it use evidence from the documents? And then is your voice clear? Right? Is your argument clear in every paragraph? Those are the things I will be looking for. Right? Now, some of you might be tempted to do additional research. You can, if you already have some quote or a source that's really helpful on this, you can use outside sources as long as you cite them correctly. You don't need to though. If all you want to do is cite, like for example, use material from lecture or material from the Global Lyceum summaries, that's all you need. You don't need to do additional research. This is not a research paper. So I want to make that clear. No, you don't need it. You can, but it's not necessary. Right? I'm hoping, I'm repeating it because I'm hoping this is going to be clear for everybody. And those of you that are working on it early, you can meet with me during office hours or after class, show me what you have, or you can email me what you have so far, and I'm always happy to give feedback, always. So if anybody wants to do that in the next couple of weeks, that is excellent. Okay, now that I've spent a little more time on this, questions, what are your, yeah, Tasha?
So the things that we use from the lecture or Global Lyceum, do we have to have a site page?
Technically, yes, but I'm going to say no. I'm not going to make you do it as I want. So if it's stuff from lecture or from Global Lyceum, I will recognize it. So I'm not going to make you cite it here. I'm like, technically in most papers, you should cite everything no matter what. But for this particular paper, for me, I'm going to say no. You don't have to.
So no bibliography, just the paper with the information that we use, unless we cite something outside of your
Yes,
source. Okay,
yes.
great.
But that's a good question. Any other questions? No. I'm like, I know there has to be other stuff. But okay, if you feel more comfortable emailing me with questions once you sit down to do it, then that is fair. All right, let's go back to talking about abortion. Yes, I know how uncomfortable it all makes you. And I'll be honest, part of me kind of enjoys making people uncomfortable on the topic of abortion. One, because the way we always talk about it, it's such a political and personal topic to a lot of us, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, what my emphasis is the history that matters. And one of the things that matters in the Roe v. Wade case is the story of Norma McCorvey, because she was one of the stories they used. It was her case and that of another couple in Texas that became the case that challenges abortion law in the United States and made it legal in the United States, right? But like we talked about now a couple of weeks ago, she is really interesting figure because she changes her political position several times, right? After the Roe v. Wade decision came out in 1973, she makes her name public, right? She's the one that comes to the media and says, I was Jane Roe of the Roe v. Wade case. Right. And because of that, she got a lot of attention. A lot of people wanted to interview her. She was an important part of the movement. Whatever she was doing, it was being noticed by the American public. And initially, like I said, she was pro-choice. She was part of the pro-choice movement. She even worked at an abortion clinic, escorting people into the clinic when there were protesters outside. But then she switched. She switched and says, I'm no longer pro-choice. I am now pro-life. So I want to play back again the video of her talking, explaining her pro-life position, right? And just let's see what she says, and then we'll see how she again changes positions later on. So this is her explaining at the time her pro-life position to Larry King, which I think most people these days don't know who Larry King was, but he was a very popular host of a show on CNN. So here we go.
I want you to meet Jane Roe of the famed case Roe versus Wade. She is Norma McCorvey, and she's at our studios in New York. How, Norma, did you get to be Roe?
Well, basically, Larry, I just went to, I found myself pregnant for the third time. I found out where an illegal abortion clinic was in Dallas. I went to it. It had been closed about a week before I had gotten there. I went away. Then I told the attorney who was handling the adoption case that I thought I wanted to have an abortion.
Your baby was brought to term and adopted, right?
Yes, sir, it was.
So you never had an abortion?
No, sir, I never have.
And they then took you as their symbolic case to go to the court?
Yes, sir. I didn't attend any of the court hearings or testify or anything like that.
Just knew you didn't want a baby?
Yes.
And why didn't you want a baby?
Well, I already had 2 babies. You know, I just really didn't want to bring another child into this world. I knew I couldn't take care of it.
And now your position is that it should go back to where it was? No abortions?
Well, I would like to see Roe versus Wade overturned, but I'm not out trying to lobby any special interest groups or any legislators or senators, you know, to overturn it. The Lord's called me to open a crisis pregnancy center, and that's what I would like to do.
Why do you think, Norma, that a woman should not have the right that she now has? Why would you take that right away? You may think it is a sin, you may think it's wrong, they may even be sad, but don't they have the right to be sad?
They do have the right to be sad if they choose to. You know, it's a very sad thing when a woman wakes up in the middle of the night and she calls a clinic and she says, I want the baby.
But the woman who doesn't do that, does she have the right to have an abortion?
I don't really feel like she really wants that abortion. I think
then will you not, if let's say we overturn it, do you fear the return of that clinic that closed in Dallas, the illegal one? Won't they come back?
I'm sure they will, Larry. I'm sure they will.
Why would you want that?
Well, I wouldn't want that. See, that's what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, there's no sense in putting yourself or a woman through that kind of circumstances because it's not really necessary.
Okay, let me make sure this doesn't, okay, it's not gonna play. All right, what do you make of her interview there, what she says? Oh, Kip's like, how sad that people don't know who he was. I'm like, because he's been off CNN for a long time. He had a show in, what was it, Al Jazeera or the RT, I think it was. But either way, people don't, I'm like, I realize people no longer know who he is. He had also a kind of style in interviewing that people liked. But anyways, what do you notice here in McCorvey's answers? Did anything stand out to you?
Kind of wishy-washy.
She's a little bit wishy-washy. Yeah, if you notice, I was like, when she explains why she wanted an abortion, she's still like, she can clearly articulate why she wanted that abortion. Like, even though her political position changed, she still gives a very good argument for why she wanted the abortion initially. Ivana, did you want to add? No, okay, I just noticed that the mic was off. And anybody else notice anything? She's actually the exception in a lot of cases because she did ooh, yeah, am
I recognize that while at the same time she's like, I feel like Roe versus Wade should be overturned. She does recognize that if Roe versus Wade is overturned, then there will be like illegal, unsafe abortions, and she doesn't want that to happen. So like a lot of her like, yeah, like they said, she sounds like very wishy-washy, like just kind of like it does, she never came into like any like definitive conclusion on what she like really wants. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting looking back at those interviews because we know she changes her position, right? And it's interesting looking back and seeing what she said and how there were hints that maybe what she was saying wasn't necessarily 100% what she believed, or that maybe she wasn't sure of what her position was. Because what I'm going to play you next is a clip of her near her death. So this was at the end of her life. She allowed a documentary crew to come in and interview her. They also interviewed the people that she worked with in the pro-life movement. So you're going to hear, like, the man you're going to see in the clip, he was part of the pro-life movement. And then you're going to see women in the pro-choice movement, in the feminist movement, who had worked with her and had felt betrayed by her switching sides. Towards the end of her life, what you see she's going to say is, she's going to say she lied, that she was never pro-life. And so let's hear what she says, and then we can talk about it. So this is towards the end of her life when she says this.
Did they use you as a trophy?
Of course. I was the big fish. I was the big fish.
Do you think they would say that you used them?
Well, I think it was a mutual thing. You know, I took their money and they put me out in front of the cameras and told me what to say, and that's what I'd say.
Wow.
I took their money and they put me out in front of the cameras and told me what to say. That's what I'd say.
Wow. Give me an example of what you'd say.
We've gathered here today to pay homage to the children that are being aborted in this abortuary. We're doing this because abortion is wrong. And I, as the former Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, do regret signing the affidavit for the pro-abortion camps. That was probably about it.
It was all an act.
Yeah. I did it well, too. I am a good actress. Of course, I'm not acting now. I did it well, too.
That really hurts because Jakes. It's big stakes. It's just really big stakes.
I had never heard her say anything like this. Never. But I know what we were doing. And there were times I was sure she knew. And I wondered, Is she playing us? What I didn't have the guts to say was, because I know damn well we're playing her. What we did with Norma was highly unethical. The jig is up.
All right, what do you make of it there, just on that short clip?
I feel what he said was more substantial than what anything she said.
Actually, yeah,
I don't believe nothing she's saying, even on her deathbed. I don't care.
yeah, he talks more extensively in that documentary, and he says that he kind of gives insight into how the pro-life movement in the particular organization he was a part of, how they organized and how they were trying to make an argument, and how they used her. Although I have to say, you don't see it in this clip, but I think it's very clear that the pro-choice organizations were also using Norma McCorvey. Why do you think both sides were interested in using her?
White woman.
White woman, and because she was she was Jane Roe. Everybody knew Roe v. Wade, right? Even though most of us, right, most people have never read the Roe v. Wade decision, and might know a limited amount of it. People have an opinion on the Roe v. Wade decision without having read it, and so having a person, right, who was out there, who was the symbol of it, it was a big deal. Yeah, Erica?
So I think with the pro-life movement, a lot of their like representatives or whoever is a part of it, they like to play on like the regret factor. And so I think they were interested in her, Norma, because she would play up how she quote unquote regretted maybe doing certain things. And they thought that might factor into a lot of other people's like decisions, and kind of like emotional manipulation is what I often think of.
Yeah. No, that's
They
true.
could have used anybody. They could have used any face who could do it, but they chose her for a particular reason. And why do you think they chose her? Besides being white.
Yeah, I think it was just that celebrity part of like, here we have somebody who was the Jane Roe v. Wade, who most people know her name, or a lot of people that paying attention, they would have known her name, and she's switching sides. Right? I think that whole idea of switching sides, of somebody having a change of heart, was important, especially as more and more Americans were saying that they believed it should be legal. Right. But here's the thing, the pro-choice movement also used her. When she comes out, I mean, she chose to make herself public, but then after that, they would put her in front of the cameras to tell her story all the time too. And if you watch the documentary, she talks about how, and in other interviews, she had talked about how the pro-choice movement wasn't helping her. They kept organizing interviews for her. They kept putting her in front of the cameras, but not helping her beyond that. So for her, a lot of the motivation was actually money. She was a poor woman who, especially after she comes out as Jane Roe, was hard to keep a job. And maybe she wasn't interested in keeping a job. She wanted to be paid. And the the pro-choice movement was not giving her any help. They were refusing to pay for her. The organizations flat out told her, we're not going to pay you. The people doing the interviews were not paying her. So actually, I think from the interviews I've seen of her, it does seem like money was one of her motivators for switching sides, that the pro-life movement was willing to pay her. Now, the organization says that they were not paying her to do interviews or her to go on camera, that they were giving her just financial assistance, kind of like charity. They were giving her charity, which was part of what the work their organization did. But when you hear her talk about it, it is clear that like she was interested in getting paid regardless of who was paying her. Like she wanted money.
But I have a question. So she said she went full term and gave her baby up for adoption. How come that wasn't ever documented? You know, where's this baby at?
They
And
do.
she had an abortion.
So it was a closed adoption. Some of that was just ignored at the time, but now the woman that the baby she gave birth to and that was later adopted has come out. You can find interviews with her online. But yeah, most people were not interested in that part of it. Of the adoption.
They kept her hidden during the time she was pregnant because
Yeah.
she had an abortion.
Yeah, no, she didn't have the abortion. That was part of her case, that she was denied the abortion. And it was a closed adoption. So she actually talks about early on about not wanting to meet that baby. She says, I don't want to know. I don't know. I gave her up to adoption. She's not mine. I don't want to be in her life. And it was a closed adoption. Since then, though, I don't know exactly how it came out, but they found out this, and so the now woman that what becomes her, that was her daughter, has come out publicly and said, she was my mother, my biological mother. Yeah. So it's really interesting, right? To me, part of what part of the lesson of Norma McCorvey, and you see what you think, is that you never want to be the face of a movement that's that political, that gets that much attention. Every case I've seen of where some person becomes the face of a movement like that, their life ends up not like kind of being weighed down by that. Right? You really don't make money doing that, becoming the face of a movement. I don't know, maybe today would be different. Somebody could probably find a way to monetize it in a different way. But traditionally, no, you just get a lot of attention and not a lot of much else beyond that. So it's tricky. Like, I feel like it's tricky. Yeah, Tasha?
So my opinion is, if you're not paying them, it seems like you'd be more, I would lean more towards what you're saying if you're not actually paying them to say it, versus, you're getting money to be the face of this movement.
Yeah. I'm like, it doesn't look good if you're paying the person. Yeah. So anyways, I want to hear what you all think of her. If you are interested in the documentary is called AKA Jane Roe. It's on Hulu. So if you have access to Hulu, it is available for free on Hulu. And they'll tell you, they'll delve more into her life. I just want to mention a few things more about her. Her story is actually really unique and not in some ways, right? The thing that's not unique is the fact that she had wanted an abortion is not a unique thing. Almost half of women in the US, that's the statistic we have, at some point in their life seek an abortion. She also already had children. That was her third pregnancy. And that is very typical of the kind of person that typically seeks an abortion. The atypical part, the part that is not, you don't normally see happen a lot, was her giving up the baby for adoption. Most people, even if they're denied an abortion, right, if they're forced to carry a pregnancy to term, they typically don't give the babies up for adoption. She did. So it's clear she didn't want that another baby, but she does choose abortion. And also the switching sides, that's not really that weird. When they've done analysis of the people who seek abortions, they find a significant number of conservative women who say that they are pro-life, who still seek out abortions. And that is really interesting, right? Because you would imagine that somebody who is pro-life, you're thinking, wait, why are they still pro-life even after they have had an abortion? And they've done studies of those group of people. And what they find is that most of those people believe that their situation is unique. They think, I need an abortion because I'm in a difficult position. I'm in a difficult position. I can't afford another child. I don't want another child. They think that that's really unique and that they should have a legal abortion, but they still don't think anybody else should have access to one. Again, just like it seems like it's a contradiction. But it's not for these people. Like they've already rationalized it in their heads that this is what they want. And wait a minute, I'm trying to go back to this. Give me a second. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm like, I can't see you all. Why can't I see you? So that's actually very typical of pro-life people that seek abortions, that they think their situation is very unique and it doesn't change their political position to actually get an abortion. So it's just one of those interesting things of the way like humans form their opinions, and a lot of times their experience does not necessarily change their political position. Right? Or hearing even or understanding other people's positions will not change people's positions on that topic, at least on the issue of abortion. Okay, let's look at Roe v. Wade then. Most people never read Roe v. Wade. And I understand why. Most people don't go around reading Supreme Court decisions. They're written in legal language, so a lot of us don't even understand the decisions, the wording in these decisions, except maybe Robert and those of you who are thinking about going into law, right? But the Roe v. Wade decision is actually one of the most lenient laws on abortion in the world. We have it was one of the most kind of open-ended legal statutes in the world. In places in Europe, like in Britain and in France, for example, where abortion is legal, it's legal up until a certain time in the pregnancy, right? 12 weeks, 15 weeks. Sometimes it goes even longer than that. I've seen 17 weeks, 20 weeks in the pregnancy. But in most places around the world where abortion is legal, there's some sort of cutoff somewhere. And the way the Roe v. Wade decision was written was actually very open-ended. It did create the opportunity to putting limits on it, but the decision itself was quite open-ended, right? And you see it right away in some of the early wording, right? So this is in section 1 of Amendment 14th. So this is the wording straight out from the Roe v. Wade decision. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privilege of immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within the jurisdiction equal protections of law. So never mind, I'm sorry. This was just general there. Here we go. So it's section 6 here. It says, it perhaps is not generally appreciated that the restrictive criminal abortion laws in effect in a majority of states today are of relatively recent vintage. This is a point of contention amongst the two Supreme Court decisions, Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. The more recent Dobbs decision makes the opposite argument. Historically, though, they're right here. They're right in the Roe v. Wade decision that these laws that limit a person's right to an abortion were new in American history, right? We saw a couple weeks ago when we talked about it, how most of those laws were written in the 19th century, around 1860, 64. Past that, what was the first time that laws in the US had begun to limit access to an abortion. Before then, there were no laws that said no abortions or that restricted it, right? So that the court in the Roe v. Wade decision is already right from the start taking the history into account, right? Later on, it actually goes further back into the history. It goes into ancient attitudes, right? Says these are not capable of precise determination. We are told that at the time of the Persian Empire, abortifacients were known and that the criminal abortions were severely punished. We are also told, however, that abortion was practiced in Greek times as well as in the Roman era. So let me ask you, why? Why do you think the Supreme Court in the Roe v. Wade decision goes all the way back to ancient times, talking about the Greeks, the Romans, the Persian Empire? Why does it matter? Or do you think it matters what the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians did when it came to the topic of abortion? Does it matter if the Greeks and the Romans or the Persians had abortions, whether they were legal or not?
Not supposed to. We're Americans and they're a different race, different tradition. But it seems like they're using biblical also, you know?
Yeah. Anybody, but who wants to make the case? Why do you think then the court is going back all the way to ancient history to look at the history of abortion?
Maybe just to give some validity to their reasoning.
To give some validity to it. Yeah. So absolutely, if you can find that historical cases that you can use as example, it can strengthen an argument, right? We also in the US, we like to think that we are directly connected to the Greeks and the Romans. We like to use that history a lot. Even though I'm like, there is a political connection to the Greeks and the Romans, but it's a very loose one, y'all. Like even with the Europeans like to connect themselves to the Greek and the Romans. And I'm like, yeah, there's a connection, but it's not always so direct. Yeah, Erica?
Yeah, I was gonna ask if like some of our like parts of our government are like modeled after like the Greco and Roman era. And maybe that's why.
Yeah, and some of it is
loosely modeled. Like maybe like a little bit
loosely modeled is the way. Yes, it is. And some of the founding fathers were reading ancient political documents, right? They were reading them. There's no question there. Part of the problem, though, the way sometimes we use Greek and Roman history in the modern era is we like to think that it was like the Greeks were there, then the Greeks. After the Greeks, we get the Romans and the Roman Empire. And from the Roman Empire, we get the European empires. And then from the European empires, we get the American Empire. And people forget that after the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe loses its connection to Rome and to the Greeks. Like they go in a different tradition, different laws, different political system. There's no democracy in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. It was an empire anyway, it was not a democracy. So there's a lot of times when we talk about democracy, we talk about it like it was all like in a row, one after the other. We're like, wait a minute, no, there was no democracy. I want to point that out, that while there is a connection legally, that there is a break in the connection between the Greeks, the Romans, and then the Europeans. It is not a direct line. But we might care. What did people do, right? And so this is something I've spent some time studying, what the Greeks and the Romans did when it came to abortion. And completely legal. In the Roman Empire, the idea was pater familias, right? That the father, head of household, had complete control over the children. In fact, he could legally commit infanticide the father could legally kill a newborn child, and it was completely legal because he had full control over his children. How common was infanticide? We used to think that it was very common, that whenever paternity of a child was in question, or whether or if a child was born with any kind of deformity or disability, that infanticide was common. But just in the last year, a historian has come out arguing that our sources on this are actually wrong, that infanticide was not very common. Right, so that killing infants was not super common. We do think that abortion was occurring. Well, not think, we know abortion was occurring. The question is how common it was as well. How do we know that ancient people were having abortions? It's in the medical texts. It's in the medical texts. The Egyptians preserved a lot of the Greek and the Roman documents, especially medical text, and it's very clear that there was a widespread knowledge of how to end a pregnancy in the ancient world. So anyways, it's a topic to, if anybody's interested, there is quite a bit of things written on it. We also have known by looking at like cemeteries. When you look at cemeteries, you can trace how ancient people structured their families and how large or small those families were. And whenever you see smaller families, what that usually tells us is that they were limiting family sizes in some way or another, right? Now, they don't have birth control the way we do today. So then the question is, what were they using to limit the size of their families? And usually part of the answer to that is abortions, that abortions were used as a kind of birth control method to keep family size small. And so we can trace some of those practices all the way back to hunter-gatherers. Because we know hunter-gatherers, for example, were limiting the sizes of their families. Like if you want historical examples, there is a long history and information on, like, okay, what have people all over the world, just humans in the history of humanity, how have we addressed the issue of abortion? So anyways, if you want to read, if anybody wants to read the complete Roe v. Wade decision, I do encourage you all. It makes abortion legal in the United States, but what the court will later determine is that states can place some limits, reasonable limits on how far into a pregnancy an abortion can occur. So even before the Dobbs decision, you had states all over the country who placed some sort of limit on when an abortion could occur. Right? The question in the last few years has been, how far can you go? Right? Is 7 weeks too much to limit an abortion? 4 weeks? 10 weeks? Where is the limit? And finally, in the Dobbs decision, what the court said is there is no constitutional right to an abortion. And it sent the question back, the issue of abortion said, actually, because it's not in the Constitution, the states now get to decide, right? Which is why now we have such a patchwork of access, right? So we have places like California, for example, where abortion's legal, and we've just voted to make it, to protect that right in our Constitution. But then you have places like Texas, where it's very much illegal. For all intents and purposes, it's illegal. And not only that, but they offer like sorry, my dogs. They offer that that you should turn in anybody you know that gets an abortion. And they're actually trying to limit if people can go out of state to get an abortion. Now, how legal are some of the restrictions they're putting in? It's going to be, the courts will need to decide whether Texas can even regulate what people do outside of their state. But they're trying to, put more restrictions. or trying to, states like Kansas, for example, recently had a vote on whether they would keep abortion legal or not. Well, Kansas decided to keep it legal. But that's basically what the Dobbs decision's back, sending it back to the states, and then states get to decide, right? However, they also, in the Dobbs decision, also made a point of bringing in the history, right? It said, right, in number 2, next, the court examines whether the right to obtain an abortion is rooted in the nation's history and tradition, and whether it is an essential component of ordered liberty. The court finds that the right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. And that has been very interesting to historians. We're like, okay, the court, like in the Roe v. Wade decision, has said, hey, the history matters here. But what the history and the tradition says to this court, to the current court, is nope. There's not a history and tradition of abortion being okay. Right? And that's been very interesting. Because to me, I'm like, wait a minute, did they ask a historian? And what then do they consider history and tradition? What history and tradition are they considering? Because when historians have looked at that, there is a clear history of abortions happening. Legality might have changed, but there is a history of these things happening. So what history and what tradition does the Dobbs court, what are they talking about? What do you think? What history and tradition are they talking about there? That's more open to interpretation. Because some of you are like, religious, right? That's one of the tradition, when they're talking about tradition, sometimes they're talking about a religious tradition, a religious Christian tradition. And that's actually really interesting, because I've also spent some time, okay, religion always comes up in the question of abortion. And when you look at how different religious groups have dealt with the question of abortion, it turns out that, one, typically it's been a significant debate in most religious groups. And also there is a history of allowing it. In Jewish tradition, for example, the legal Jewish documents will say that there are circumstances in which an abortion is completely allowed. It's their interpretation of Old Testament law. For example, one of the phrases in the Bible that a lot of religious scholars have interpreted, right? Because the word abortion is not used in the Bible, not in the Old Testament. It's not in the New Testament. It's nowhere in there. So what religious traditions have tried to do is then scholars have to interpret other passages in the Bible that might give us a hint of what their God is saying when it comes to abortion. So one of the phrases, for example, is the order from God to multiply. To multiply. What does that mean? It means God says you need to have children. How many children? In some Jewish traditions, if you had one, that's fine. So as long as you had one, any abortions were legal. So for some Jewish communities early, so these are ancient communities, you had to have a boy and a girl. Once you had a boy and a girl, have abortions completely legal. And some, for some Jewish scholars, the answer was, well, no, this was an order for men to multiply. But the woman's body has, like, it can miscarry. So there was no protection for a fetus. And so that's actually the widespread interpretation that Jewish scholars came up with, was that there was no legal protection for a fetus in religious tradition. Now, in Christian traditions, right, some of the most well-known restrictions to abortion come, for example, from the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church, abortions right now are not allowed. Up until recently, like, you couldn't even take communion if you had an abortion. Like, you could go to confession, but like, this was too much of a sin. It could not, like, it was an unforgivable sin. But that Catholic decision was actually up for debate up until very recently. Even today, a lot of Catholic scholars debate the question of abortion. And we don't often talk about how religious people have been debating that question for a long time. Because the question when it comes to abortion for religious people comes down to, when does life begin? When does life begin? And that's a question that religious scholars have always disagreed on. Right? So you have various religious interpretations on the question, and some religions, for some religions, abortion is not, some sort of mortal sin. It's allowed. And then in others, it's very much a sin. But even Catholics, by the way, even today disagree. Or even if, like, the Pope still says, okay, abortion is prohibited for all Catholics, a majority of Catholics in the United States still disagree. So, the most recent statistic on Catholics, by the way, is 68% of Catholics supported Roe v. Wade. It's against the religious tradition. The head of the Catholic Church says it is not allowed. Catholics still supported it, right? And then the most common thing, I'll stop here, is what most people actually, even in the pro-choice camp, the most common attitude is really what Biden's position is. I used to use him as the example a lot before he became president. Now I'm like, it's too political. But his position is, he's a practicing Catholic, right? He believes abortion is a sin. But he thinks the law is a separate issue. Right? There's religious beliefs. People make a distinction between what they would do and what should be legally allowed. So that's a very common position of people who believe, I wouldn't do it. I think it's a sin, but I think the law should allow it. So there's, like, the variety of positions that people take is actually very wide and really interesting to me as a historian of this topic. So, okay, I will stop the recording. I'm like, where is it? I told you I forgot.